Hey monkeys, it's Jim from Small Time Outlaws, and welcome to the 9th video in the Simple Game Programming Tutorial series. With this video, we're going to be adding the graphical elements to our game. So to start with, we're going to import and animate our players with some pre-made player image that I've very humbly provided for you in the description box below if you would like to use that. Otherwise, you can check it out and then create your own characters, or you can modify the ones I've made, whatever you want to do. So just to make sure it works right for you, want to go into your project folder and create a folder using your main file name. If you use main.monkey like me, then it would be main.data. Otherwise, whatever your main file is, the left hand side, then .data, and then you're going to put all your media and all your the other data in here. So for right now, all I have is just this player's image that has 4 players animated, and each player has its own row. So I can go ahead and blow this up for you. So let's go open with the Windows Photo, and so now you can see a little better. Whoop. See, here's our first player. They're all little cave dwellers. That's kind of the idea. And so we have our just like an idle animation here, then we have basic walking, and then a little arm flailing falling animation right here. It's just 2 frames. So that's what we've got for each of our characters here. And so you also see I've got a little diversity going on here. We got some mixed genders, mixed races. I try to keep it real. So let's go back to the code. And so if you've got that file, all you need for this video is just the players.ping, but you can put all the files in here if you want. And now let's go to our player class, and first thing we're going to do is get rid of this color stuff because we don't need it anymore. So we can change this. I'll save that for just a bit. So the first field we're going to put in place of those is img for image, and that's going to be the image. It's actually going to be a pointer to, or it's going to be a reference to that image, that full player image. And then the next one is going to be frame offset, and this is going to tell our game which frame in that player animation image, which frame this player starts at. So if I go back to that image real fast, and I'm gonna blow this back up. What you'll see, the first player, each player has 8 frames, and so player 1 or whatever, if we wanted our player to be this guy with the green shirt, his frame offset or his starting frame is going to be the first frame, and then monkey frames are 0 based, so it's going to be 0 for this one. And for this little girl here, it's going to be 8. For this guy, it's going to be 16, and this one's going to be 24. So that's the frame that their little animation starts on. Okay, so now let's switch these out. We don't need a name anymore because we're gonna reference all of these players using that player, their image, the player image. So we don't need name. So all we're gonna pass into our player class is the frame offset for this particular player. And now we can take all this out and just do self.frame offset, this time frame offset. Oh, and also can't forget, we need to pass in that image as well. So let's do image, and then self.image assign image. There we go. And now let's go into the draw method, and we're going to get rid of this stuff. We don't need it anymore. All we have to put in here is the draw image call, and then the image that were provided for this player, then this player's position, and it's going to center this image at this position because of the way we're going to load these images, or this image. And then we're going to specify the frame that we want to show. And for right now, we're not animating just yet, so we're going to go with that first frame that's provided, the very first frame. Now back in our main class, let's create another field, and this is going to be the reference to that player's image, so we're going to call it player's image. Then down in here, we're going to, up above where we add our players, we're going to set that player's image to, and we're going to use the load image function, and we'll provide it with that player image. And then the next two are going to be the width and height of each frame, the pixel width and pixel height of each frame in that image. In this case, they're all 32 by 32. And after that, we're going to do how many frames are in this image, and it's what, 8 by 4, so that's 32 again. And then we're going to specify that we want these images to be mid-handled. That's how everything's going to be centered. All the frames are going to be centered on the position we specify when we draw. Now we go here and just change these. We're going to pass in player's image, and then our first player is going to be the boy, so we'll say it's the first frame, 0 frame. And the next one we'll go with the next player in the row, the little girl, and that she'll be the 8th frame starting out. Now let's go into on render, and now instead of the score, instead of drawing the name, we're going to draw their image once again, just for fun. So now we're going to say draw image, the player's image, and then we're going to go with that player original position, and then we're going to offset it from that position so we're not running into the score values. We're going to offset it, let's give it a good amount, say 50, and we're going to put it down on 32 line. And the frame we want to choose is that current player's frame offset. So just kind of like a default image for each player, that first frame. And then when we draw the score, we want to bring it down so it's lined up with that image, so they're both kind of centered. And then we're going to right align the score so it doesn't run into the image. And we're going to go ahead and align it vertically as well, halfway, so it's kind of, so they'll both be centered vertically on that 32 pixel line. And now you want it to go down here and make sure we're not calling, see they've got this color stuff, but we don't need this anymore. And we also don't have player names anymore, so we can get rid of this. And just to make sure this actually works, let's go ahead and run it. So we've got our player, oh no, so you can see it looks like, okay, they're using the color, I think they're using our dark gray color for our blocks. That was the last set color called before these were drawn, so we definitely need to fix that. So, and the way you do that is quite simple. You just make sure the color is set back to white before you draw them. So you can see we draw our blocks here, so let's move this set color up to here. So that will reset it to white and then draw our players fully illuminated. So let's do this again, and there we go, they're drawn, yay, and they're running around, and they're also dying. And you might have noticed that the players they were just staying in one direction, they weren't pointing in the right direction that they were traveling. So what we're going to do is we're going to simply flip our images if we are, depending on which key is being pressed. So go back into the following module and into the player class, add one more field, and this one's going to be called flip, and this is just going to be the current state of the player's the scale in the X direction. So in Monkey, if you scale a player, or if you scale an image, when you draw it in a negative, with a negative value, it's actually going to flip it on whatever axis you put that negative value into. So by default, it's just going to be 1, so they're going to be pointing to the right. So when we go down into our key checks here, so if they're holding down left, we want to set that flip to negative 1.0. So that'll, so that'll flip them to the other way. And then when they're holding on right, we're just going to set that back to 1. So that's going to point our players to the right. And now when we draw, we're going to use the overloaded draw image function that takes after the position X and Y, it takes the angle, and we're just going to leave it at 0. That's the default, so standing upright. Then in the next one is the scale in the X direction, which is the one we want to put flip in, and then finally it's the scale in the Y direction. We're not going to be flipping in the Y direction, so we're just going to leave that at 1. So now that should flip our players left and right. So let's go in and check that out. Oh, we got to go back to our main file. Let's go ahead and check that out. See, oh yay, okay, so now they're actually pointing in the right direction. So let's go back. And now let's animate. So down here at the bottom of the, oh nope, back in our following module, sorry. Let's go down to the bottom of the following module, and we're going to add another class. And this is going to be called the animation class. And this class is just going to be pretty much a container for different variables for different properties of animations. So, like say our idle animation is going to have, it's going to have a different number of frames, a different start frame. It's going to have, we want it to have a different, speed at which the animation plays and everything. And then same with the running animation and the falling animation. So those are all going to be different animation objects. So to start, we're just going to go add the field name, and this is how we're going to reference these animations. And then next field is going to be start frame, so this is going to be the frame that animation starts on. The next one is going to be the length of the animation, so just how many frames. And then the frames per second that you want this animation to play at. And then down below that, there's two fields we are going to set at creation that are going to be calculated. So you see one start time, and that's when the time that the animation is started, so that we can do timer-based animation on this, and then we'll have it offset from the time that we get back from the milliseconds function. So, and if you watched the mojo videos, the using mojo videos, you'll kind of understand what's going on here. I mean, you're going to be using the same functionality for that. And then here, this is something we're going to calculate when we create the instance of this object. This will be frame time. This is just going to store the number of milliseconds we want on the screen per frame, or the number of seconds we want each frame to be on the screen. So let's go ahead and create our constructor. We're going to pass in the name for this animation, the start frame, the length, and the frames per second that it runs at. And then all those are going to be initialized into our fields. Whoops. Start frame, self.length, assign length, and self.fps, assign fps, and then finally we're going to calculate that frame time, which is just going to be the number of milliseconds divided by the frames per second. That'll tell you how many milliseconds each frame is going to be on the screen. And this is just so you don't have to calculate this every time we go through to figure out which frame is next. We just do it ahead of time. So now let's go back to the player class, and we're going to add some fields for these animations. So first one is just going to be a list of the animation objects, and so we're going to initialize it with an empty list, and then we're going to create another field, and it's going to be called cur_anim for short, and this is just going to store the current animation that's playing for this player. And so now down, just when we let's go ahead and stick this here. Just when we initialize our player, we're going to add an animation, and we're going to call this animation. We'll create a new animation object, and we'll call this animation idle. And then so the idle animation, if you remember, is the first 2 frames. So starting at frame 0 with a length of 2 frames, and then we want it to run. We'll make it nice and slow. So we'll say 5 frames per second. And then by default, we're going to set the animation to idle, and now we're actually create this method right now. So let's do it at the bottom of the class. Say method set animation, and the string or the anim name is coming in. And now what we're going to do is switch out the animation that's playing from whether either if it's if that cur anim is null, so there hasn't been one yet, or if the current animation is different from the one coming in. So otherwise it's just going to reset the same animation over and over and over again. So we want to just make sure that it's different. Only if it's different from the current animation will we switch it. And that way you can just say set animation, and as long as you don't send it a different animation, that animation is going to loop nicely. So we'll say if the current animation is null, or if the name coming in is not the same as the current animation's name, we're going to set the current animation, and we'll be creating another method called get animation by name, which is just going to look through our animation list until it finds that name and then return it. And then we will set the start time to the current milliseconds. So this will just reset the animation, so it'll start over fresh and new, and it will look nice. And now, so let's go ahead and create that get animation by name method. By name, and it's going to return an animation object. It's going to bring in a name that's a string. Now for we'll do a nice each in once again for our animations. So each in animations, then if the animation, if that current animation here, if that name matches the name coming in, we are going to return return that animation, the reference to that animation, and then otherwise it's just going to return null, which we'll go ahead and write out. Alright, and now to draw these animations properly, let's go up to our draw method here, and we're going to create a local variable called current frame, and then we're just going to check, make sure the current animation is not null, so there's actually an animation set in there. Now we're going to use our wonderful math from the Mojo videos, if you saw it, to calculate the current frame based on that start time. Start frame. So starting from the first frame in that animation, and then we're going to add to that the time that has passed since that animation started, so the current milliseconds minus the current animation start time. We're going to divide this by the amount of time we want each frame to be on the screen, so that's the frame time. Then we're going to mod all this using the mod operator by the length of the animation. And so that's gonna just tick through all the frames in this particular animation at whatever time we specify. So for the idle animation, it's going to tick through 2 frames, just back and forth at 5 frames per second. And we go to close that off, and now we can say frame offset plus cur frame. And so the reason I've set this frame offset, so one thing you're going to have to remember is each player is going to have the same frame start for like each animation, even though the actual frame, like say for the girl, her idle frame starts with frame 8 and then goes to frame 9. But since we're using this frame offset, we're going to say just all of them is just going to be the first whatever column that frame's in inside that image, if that makes sense. So you don't have to worry about setting 8 for the girl and then 16 for the next one and 24 for the next one. You just leave all these with these standard values. And now let's go ahead and add the remaining animations, which are the running. So we're going to call this one run. And the run starts at frame 2 and is 4 frames long, and let's make it 10 frames per second, a little bit faster. And finally, the last animation is the falling, so we're going to call it falling. It starts at frame 6 and is 2 animations long, so that's the last 2 frames in our animation. We're going to leave this at 10. And now, so it knows when to show the running animation and whatnot, we're going to add another field to our player class, call it running, make it a bool, and then down here we're going to check if the velocity in the x direction is greater than 0, then we're going to say, hey, they're running. Otherwise, they're not running. So, or not greater than, but does not equal 0. Otherwise, it's going to be false. So that's going to tell it, hey, it's running, hey, it's not running. So let's go back to our main class down here in the update player. And after we've updated everything, we're going to check, say, hey, if player.running, then we're going to set that player's animation to the run animation. Else if they're not running and their velocity in the y direction is 0, that means they're just standing on a platform. So if that's the case, we want to set the animation to the idle animation. Otherwise, if nothing else, it's likely that they're not on a platform and they're not pressing the keys left and right to run, so they're going to be just falling. So we're going to run our little falling animation. And now let's run this. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this on the YouTube video, but you can see right here they're both idling. Now they're falling. See, he falls, and then they got their cute little running animation. Wee, wah, 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 wah. And so that's it for this video. Join me in the next one. We're going to do a little more graphical enhancements to the game. So I'll see you there. If you have any questions, email me at jim@smalltimeoutlaws.com or leave some comments down below.